several burning topics of the world. Activism, the wave of protests in 2019 with some interesting guests, the activism during coronavirus pandemic with some other people who are doing amazing stuff during the lockdown. Our last session was also very thrilling, and thanks Slobo and everybody from Black Lives Matter to the American journalists who participated in that one, covering the US-based anti-racial protests. Today we are going to talk about a topic which is very dear to our heart here in Canvas, which is the topic of creative activism, dilemma actions, and the role of humor. Today we are going to have several interesting guests. I will be hosting this session, trying to guide you through the basics of the dilemma action and activism. We will also have with us our longtime friend and amazing former Khmer activist, now a lawyer and a university professor, Georgi Meladze. Also Dr. Sophia McLennen, a very good friend of mine, whom I often refer to the person who has the most amazing work on the planet. She needs to watch a lot of the satire and a lot of the late night shows and figure out how it's influencing the human brain and the politics. And also, I'm proudly to say I teamed up with her in a really interesting and thrilling research on influence on dilemma actions and humor, which she's going to be talking about. My name is Srdja Popovic. I am executive director in Canvas, who is hosting this session. A little bit of the agenda and the housekeeping. We will start right now by jumping into the world of the dilemma action and creative activism. We'll try to dissect the phenomenon. We're also going to try to look at the effects the humor have when it's used effectively on the nonviolent movements, as well as nonviolent movements opponents. We're going to move to Georgi's case study from amazing 2004 Revolution of Roses, amazing case of well-structured dilemma action with great effect. We wanted to take a look at the one deep case study, and then we will migrate to what we are actually doing right now on Sophia. With Sophia's help, also there is a great team of researchers working on over 40 cases of dilemma actions and activism, Laughtivism in last 100 and so years. So what are they, how they're influencing movements and the battleground, and what can we learn from this data? I will start with trying to define the dilemma actions and what they are and what they are not and how they work. And simplest way to say it's a strategic approach on designing your tactics, so they put your opponent between the rock and the hard place. So once again, when we talk about the importance of principles in nonviolent struggle, we very often refer to the unity. During the BLM session, we also offered a really good explanation on why nonviolent discipline is one of the standing principles of nonviolent struggle. But this is the part of the third member of the Holy Trinity of principles, the principle of planning. If you don't plan your strategy, if you don't plan your tactics, you will end up in failure. And similarly, if you dig deeper on why successful tactics work, there is a planning process. So how do you plan the dilemma action? What is dilemma action? And how do you involve this in your nonviolent movement arsenal is something that I will be focusing on during this time. First of all, I will just point your topic. I mean, it's like person wearing a hat. How this relates to the dilemma? Well, if carefully structured, it actually can. If you take a look at the Burmese movement under the military junta, which was mostly underground and very limited in explanation, but also facing the large fear and the oppression for more than 2 decades, you will see that that movement needs a kind of symbol. And they found their symbol in a simple farmer's hat, very often worn by the simple farmers in this particularly agricultural country. But then wearing this hat becomes a political statement. It also becomes a way of people who stand for the same things to recognize each other and understand that they are not alone and therefore reduce fear. And then it poses the dilemma for the oppressive regime. If we really start arresting people for wearing hats, where will we end? Because we have so many people wearing these hats around the Burma, and some of them are wearing them just to simply protect themselves from the sun. This is typically one of the cases within our research that we are looking at. Then to the more recent thing, we were spending a lot of time talking about what the actual anti-racism movement can learn from a successful civil rights movement. Well, you know, it's like there were like many different carefully planned tactics, from Montgomery bus boycott to boycotting the food courts, or at that time called desk lounge counters, in the malls. What was happening during the fight against the segregation is that you had malls in mostly South US states where predominant buyers were Afro-Americans. But the food courts in these malls were segregated. So you were allowed to buy and spend your money in a mall. At the same time, you couldn't sit in a McDonald's. So cleverly targeted action by the Afro-American students was designed. The students were going and just sit there. They didn't order nothing. They were just waiting for the police to arrest them, put them in the cars and leave. The moment the police car leaves, the new stray of Black students will come in and take the seats, disrupting the work of the restaurant. So this puts the business owners in a dilemma. If they keep the mall segregated, what will happen is that they will lose a lot of money. And you know that business pillar responds only to this language of gaining and losing money. However, if they desegregate this, they will do the bad favor to their segregationist political elects. And this was the dilemma for them. At the end, of course, the movement was successful. We know that the food courts are now desegregated, and this is part of the meticulous planning process which involves understanding of the pillar, creating a dilemma action, then training people to behave completely peacefully, even when drugged up from these seats, and then the new group of the people ready to take place. So you are doing the continuous disruption. Once again, planning is the king or queen when it comes to the nonviolent movements, and there are only two types of nonviolent movements. They are either spontaneous or successful. So if you want them to be successful, you need to do a little bit of the planning. The first really documented case of dilemma action is, of course, the Gandhi Salt March. So note here that dilemma actions are not limited to pro-democracy struggle. They're not limited to the human rights struggle. They're sometimes part of self-determination or anti-colonial struggles. They were the big part of the struggles against the occupation, or the struggle against the foreign occupation, like the Soviet Union case in Estonia. We take a look at how Gandhi geniusly take a look at the topic and say, okay, we will get rid of the Brits, but we need to start somewhere. And then he took the first very important thing in a dissection of the dilemma action, which was picking the right issue. So when you are picking your right issue for dilemma action, it needs to be something that relates to a lot of the people, that is related to the widely held belief, and it somehow tackles everybody. So yes, everybody in India and everywhere else in the world needs salt. And yes, everybody knows that for producing the salt, all you need to do is to have a little piece of beach and a little bit of sun. Well, India has more than 4,000 miles of the beach, but Brits were still taxing salt, therefore humiliating people of India, and also using their own salt production for the purpose of further oppression and colonization. And there was a little fine connected to breaking this ban. This is also the key. So basically, this is a low-risk action, because what happens is that if you get caught, you will get to pay a little fine or sit in a jail for like 2 weeks. And this is where Gandhi created the whole movement around it. Not only that he made salt, he made a big march. And starting with several dozens of people, ending with thousands of people, more than 7 or 8 days, which were all documented and photographed. And there was a drama, and there was a TV following this. He was a real master of strategy, and anybody who really wants to see how somebody who is such an extraordinary person can have this amazingly sharp and strategic mind should be studying Gandhi. So eventually, the marchers got to the sea. Gandhi was the first one to start making salt. And that was the big dilemma for the British colonial empire. If they leave Gandhi do whatever he's going to do, then everybody will start producing the salt, and nobody will be paying taxes, and they will lose a lot of revenue, plus they will look weak. If, however, they arrest Gandhi and send him for a little bit of the prison and fine him a little bit, they will make him a national leader of the resistance movement. So, of course, the history tells us that they decided about the later solution. Gandhi was sitting a bit in a jail, and when he came out, he came out as a strategic leader of the movement. Now, dissecting into this dilemma action, we see that selecting an issue is one thing. Then designing a low risk or a medium risk action around this topic is yet another piece of show. Then performing it correctly, non-violently, in a disciplined manner, with a certain element of PR is a third element of show. But once again, when you seed and water, you need to harvest. So it's not only enough to do effective dilemma action, it is also very important to capitalize on this impact, to recruit new people, to see if the groups will replicate it, to see how to gain international support. All of this and more was the part of this particularly genius dilemma action by Gandhi. And all of this and more was the part of the data set that we are now looking at into this research in order to measure the real impact of the dilemma actions. Now we evolve from dilemma actions to the phenomenon we proudly call Laughtivism. And this is, of course, when the Serb is trying to coin the English words, this is how it sounds. And then every time the Google spelling gives you the corrections on this, because this world actually doesn't exist, or at least didn't exist until some great people start working on it. Basically, this is the idea that not only you can design the dilemma action, but you can grain a little bit of the humor to it. We learned this by doing it. Once again, Serbs are pranksters. $50. We came to the ingenious idea that maybe we should get an old oil barrel, the type of the one you see in the screen, and then we can paint the face of the Mr. Milosevic in the barrel, and then we can offer people a chance to put a little coin into the barrel, and then boom, hit, and thus show their respect and what they really think about the president. And we drug this barrel into the main pedestrian district or shopping zone in Belgrade, and the result was stunning. Within the range of 15 minutes, there were probably 150 people queuing to hit the barrel. And then we pull back, sit in a nearby cafe, have our espressos, and enjoy the show. But, you know, hitting the barrel and kids dancing around the barrel was not the funny part. The funny part was when police arrived. So now what police would do? This is a typical dilemma situation. They are seeing a bunch of downtown shoppers, none of them chanting political slogans, so there are no usual suspects to be arrested. They don't break the law, so there are no basis upon which these people could be arrested. Still, they're making something that they have orders to stop, which is humiliating the president and the strongman of the country. And of course, they were looking for us. We were nowhere to be found. They couldn't arrest downtown shoppers because they'll be released within 15 minutes and probably sue the police. And of course, what they did was they arrested the barrel. Now the post-production comes here. Photographing police drugging the barrel with Milosevic's face to the police cars while arresting the barrel, and then making the whole campaign for releasing the barrel out and getting the poor barrel out of the prison was an amazing thing. And it reduced fear. The police that we were afraid of, the police that was part of the repression in Serbia, the police that was regularly arresting opposition, the police whose parts participated in bloody war crimes in Bosnia and Croatia, they are a punchline. Everybody's laughing at them. So you A, discredit your opponent, you B, break the fear, you C, give people a lot of fun, you D, give people a lot of prominence inside your movement and everybody talks about it, and E, you avoid being arrested. So when you look at the planning process and look at the effects of this, this is really something stunning. Of course, we didn't know that we are having the gold in our hands, and only later, thanks partly to the work of one of the canvas trainers, Sinisha Shikman, who was the first person I know really collecting and documenting dilemma actions, we came to the idea how widespread this is and what is the real power of humor in nonviolent struggle. Fast forward to 2012, Barnaul, Russia, the small Siberian village, protests were banned. This was the time when Putin's administration was getting him, I don't know, third, fourth term, and he would win these elections anyhow, but they wanted to have him a little bit too much. And then, of course, the people were caught on the cameras in the balloting place, in stuffing the ballot boxes, and the protests sparked Russia. In small places, people could not protest. It was banned. So they came to the idea that maybe they could organize a toy protest. Maybe they can bring their kids' toys from Kinder Surprise eggs and things of that kind. And they build a little town, and the little toys come in. And if you take a look at the transparency, it's 146% for Putin. Give us free and fair elections. And there is an actual footage of it in the Guardian website that you can watch. And you can literally see how the people are taping it, and the police is taping it, because it's a small town. Everybody knows local police. Nobody gets arrested. It's for them the large event. And that was the day one. But that was not the problem. The problem was when the video got 700,000 views on YouTube overnight. And some of these views were coming from Kremlin. So now somebody in Kremlin sits down and figures out how to stop it. Because if this goes unchallenged, we'll have a bunch of the toy protests across Russia. Of course, the phone rang to the chief of police in Barnaul, and the poor soul had to make probably the most ridiculous statement in the history of the security forces, claiming that officially the announced protest of 100 Kinder Surprise toys, 100 legal people, 20 model soldiers, and 10 toy cars is banned because the toys are not citizens of Russia. And by constitution, only citizens of Russia can protest. Toys were probably made in China or something like that. So now you see how the creativity and wit and strategic approach and a little bit of bravery and some good fun can work against, we are talking about the guy here, the president of Russia, who loves to pose shirtless, who loves to ride horses, who makes calendar with his muscular torso, who dives for wrestles with tigers, save dolphins from drowning, and he's afraid of toys. Now this is the trick. Damn if you do, damn if you don't. If your opponent doesn't react to this type of wit, he or she will look weak. If they do, they end up looking stupid and arresting toys and barrels and things of that kind. We can expand this. And Sophia can tell you how our data show that this is the increase in this type of tactics, where you're looking at challenging the autocratic governments, where you're looking challenging the extremist groups. When we take a look at Finland in 2016, you will see that they have a very nasty anti-immigrant right-wing group called Soldiers of Odin, happily marching in their black uniforms in immigrant-rich areas, supposedly protecting the native Finnish people from the evil of immigrants that will come to take our jobs and rape our daughters, or whatever the narrative is. And of course, the activists were looking at this, and the normal reaction is fear. And then the second normal reaction is anger. But if you attack these people, you're feeding exactly into their own narrative. So instead of doing wrong thing, they did the right thing. They organized the March of the Clowns, and with each one of the soldier of Odin was accompanied with a clown of Odin. And now you have a very different pictures in the newspapers, and now you have a dilemma for your opponent. So if Nazis continue marching together with clowns, they look ridiculous. If they attack clowns, they will have another problem though. So damn if you do, damn if you not. Similar great case from Bundesdale, Germany, the nice liberal city whose only burden is the fact that Rudolf Hess was born there. So every year they have a bunch of the neo-Nazis marching there. And the city was kind of in the Charlottesville type of psychosis, and the people were home until somebody came to the idea that to organize the local communities and businesses to donate a certain amount of money for each 100 meters that the Nazis will march. So yes, we will allow them to have march, but their march will bring money to the organization called Exit Germany, which is actually helping people with crazy ideas to get rid of them, kind of rehab for extremists. So now imagine these Nazis coming there with their little flags and being super orderly, ready to march. And then they passed the first mark. They said, you just donated 100 euros. The second mark, you just donated 500 euros. Third mark, thank you for donating 1,000 euros to exit Germany. And then you have a bunch of the local people lined up to cheer them and say, go more, we need more money. You need more help. You need more rehab. Let's fundraise for your rehab. So now you're having the situation where you're putting your opponent between the rock and a hard place. And our study shows that this works equally against the state actors or the non-state actors. It is about the process and clever targeting, not about who your opponent may be. I will end up this little intro with stating the 3 key roles, at least in my opinion, of humor in nonviolent struggle. The first, humor breaks fear and apathy. And fear and apathy are considered to be the 2 main status quo factors. So how this works has nothing to do with the social science. Having a very bad teeth, I spend a lot of time in my life in a dentist waiting room. And the last thing you want to hear when you are going to dentist or to a surgery is a doctor coming to you and say, this is how the operation will look. We are going to open your chest. We're going to put these 2 metal things in. We're going to intube your mouth. You're going to be in a complete narcosis. Then I'm going to take this scalpel, and you're like, don't give me this, please. If your friend comes and cracks the joke, your fear disappears. Same with apathy. That's the second very important element. Humor makes your movement look cool. Now, having a movement in a very cool position also originates from the times when old farts like me, Georgi, or Sophia were coming to many parties. And you know when the party is dull and you really want to go home, and here comes somebody with a great sense of humor, and actually turns into something completely different, and it turns into a place you really want to stay, and you actually congratulate yourself for coming there. And also when you ask yourself intimately, who is the most attractive person I know? It is the one with the thickest wallet, the one with the longest number of titles in front of his or her education degree, or the one who can always make you laugh? The answer is, of course, the one who can always make you laugh. And this cool thing that the movement shows by acting with humor is something that attracts people, because people love being around the cool people, and people love doing things which are cool. And if they're a little risky and edgy and cool, that ultimately makes you a hero, and not only if you are in your 20s. Last but not least important, as I explained, the power of dilemma in Laughtivism is even stronger if you add the humor. A lot of these people in the position of power, and most of these actions are actually either targeting the people in power or people who seek power. They live in their own world. If you are in power for 10, 12, 13, 15 years, sometimes even shorter, depending on the character, you start believing this image of yourself, always seen in the newspapers and in the media and in the billboards, and you just start taking yourself too seriously. And that's the mistake, because then you are not immune to the pranks and humors and jokes and teasing. And this is where you can react in a way that actually it benefits the nonviolent movement. More about this, also more about a very interesting phenomenon that Sophia and I often talk in private and on stage and in interviews. Don't mix satire with Laughtivism. Satire is the normal part of every society, and telling a joke about the guys or the bad guys or the guys in power is something which is really similar wherever you look at the society. But strategic approach, creating a dilemma action and then adding the humor, this is what the Laughtivism is. So the Laughtivism is a conscious effort and strategically planned effort for your opponent, actually designed to produce the reaction, while satire, however brilliant and beautiful, is a byproduct of the every single society, and also helps people process things and helps people processing information, but doesn't have this activist element attached to it. Without talking much longer, we're getting to the same pace. I bet you have a lot of questions in the chat. I will try to answer some of them in the chat, then I'll pull 1, 2, or 3 and give it to our guests. But until then, we will first hear Georgi talking about the marvelous dilemma action in his own struggle. Georgia, Georgi, the floor is yours, and the screen is yours. I'm removing my presentation.
Thank you, Srdja. Really inspiring talk, and puts you in a mood to work harder on this session. It will take me not even a minute now to share my screen. Okay, so I think you see it now. Well, thank you for this opportunity to present to your audience. And the topic is really something very close to my heart also. And I think it's one of the major issues when we speak about nonviolent campaigns and nonviolent movements, because there's frequently this notion that when you speak of nonviolence, wait, is there something about violence there? So people get very cautious and try to somehow put it in very, kind of frames. And then when you have the humor and when you have this optimism in the campaigns, it totally changes the mindset and the energy that flows with it. And you get very, very interesting reactions from what we call neutrals in this campaign. So the story I'm going to talk is the Georgian story, which is maybe now 15 years, more than 15 years old. And well, it did its job when we were trying to change something in Georgia. Because not everybody knows about Georgia, I decided to give you a very brief facts about what it was back in 2002, 2003, so you can have this idea how the specific action that I'm going to talk about fit into the bigger picture. So we're talking about the country which regained its independence in early 90s, going through 2 civil wars immediately, going through economic collapse. I have here hyperinflation of 7,000%. Maybe some of you know what it means, but if you don't know, it's lots of economic, it's very hard to live in that kind of economic system, economic reality. Everything is falling apart, and the institutions, infrastructure. Well, basically it was mafia. We have tradition of this mafia, which revived immediately and gained the floor and occupied the streets and occupied the institutions. They were basically the ones collecting the taxes. And so we had basically a gang rule and the gang order in the streets. Well, the authors describing the time, they call it a chaos, and it was the chaos. And I'm still surprised how we managed out of that situation so quickly in basically 10 years, but we did, and that's giving some optimism to the society. Civil society is getting some energy, and I'm talking now about late 90s. When Khmara, the movement started to form, late 90s, the new generation, people, students, trying to see the future of the country, which wasn't so bright. Georgia was called the country of the gray zone, which is not moving forward. Okay, it's not falling apart anymore, but it's not moving forward, it's stalled. And poverty is the rule, corruption is the rule, political actors very weak, and civil society is basically, you can count active people on the fingers. So everybody is somehow waiting for a miracle. But I believe the times when Khmara started its activities, already people even lost their hope in miracles. So it was quite a difficult situation to be in, very nihilistic attitudes around, and no vision for the future. So it's quite difficult to come into that arena and try to present your case and try to encourage people and give them hope that these elections can change something. So this this is the reality for 2003 elections, that for government, it was just another elections, and the movement and the members of the movement, they believed that this could be a change, that this could be a new beginning. Well, somehow you have to deliver your story. Somehow you have to encourage people to trust you, and it's not so easy when everybody is so busy with the daily routine. And so, well, Kamara had to do a lot. It had to design a message that will encourage people. It had to design strategy that will keep the action going, so people start believing that there is something happening. Because before that, we had several campaigns, several protests, and all of them, they ended with basically not much for an average voter. So what can happen in a different way? And that's where we as a Kamara, and here, by the way, I'm presenting you the t-shirt, which was just released like 2 years ago by one Georgian designer, and now it costs a lot of money, but by then nobody wanted to see this fist anywhere. So it's also kind of funny how the history changes the meaning of the symbols. Now it's a brand, it's a fashion brand, and before it was something that people would run away from. And we decided one thing: if we want to do something, it has to be result oriented. It has to deliver a specific result, not just protest, not just shouting, not just saying that something is wrong. No, it has to be result oriented. Small step, but result oriented. I think it's a big decision when you make the decision, because it puts your thinking in a totally different frame. And even now I see plenty of activists, and Georgia is boiling again these days. We have a new civil movement coming up, growing up, and this totally different generation, new generation of people are doing it. And I'm still seeing these old mistakes that were done again and again, that let's protest, let's raise our voices, but there is very little about specific results. So I think this was a big decision for the movement to be result oriented. And here is the logo that we took. And so we said, let's try to have several rules. First, we never stop, we never take a rest. We always design every campaign as a result-oriented action, and our action should aim to show what is the failure of the state, why we should act and why we should change something. We have to have many friends, we have to talk to as many people as possible, and we have to be visible. So these are major things. I believe you spoke about these things in the previous classes, and well, I just thought that it was important to just raise these issues once again, because the movements frequently are taken as just a protest campaigns where you speak about your problems, and not as a managed system of actions that has the specific aims. So the Kamara started as a campaign, and one of the topics we chose was the health sector, the problems in a health sector. Well, the 15 years, 10 years, let's say, of total negligence led to deteriorated conditions in the hospitals. Buildings were ruined. Well, there were no window glasses on the hospitals, so the patients, they had to stay basically outside even in the frozen periods. There was no heating, there were no basic conditions met to treat anybody. On the other hand, a certain group of people, like the ones connected to the government, the ones who had good networks and who could pay bribes, they could have better conditions. And so the system was very selective in who it was delivering to. So that's where we said maybe this is a good place to show vividly where are the main problems of the government, where are the main problems of the state. And there was this story, we had this hotline, we had networks with the organizations sending problems to us. And so one of the problems that came up was this kid who needed very urgent assistance, medical assistance, but parents were poor, no money to support. So what to do? They asked for support to the state, but of course they get this template letter. We cannot help. There is no funds in a budget. So that's it. I mean, system just wash its hands, and that's where we decided to act, because there was a specific thing, and these sort of problems attracted lots of attention from the society. So we said we need to help this kid and get involved. So first thing we did, we started to talk to media. There is something like this gonna happen on this day. Are you interested to come and cover this story, to show this story? Well, we did not have much feedback from media, but we still decided. We had 1 or 2 journalists interested to join. And so we said, okay, it's good, we can go ahead. And then we started this picketing of the Ministry of Health main entrance, which where many people go in daily. And we said, we're gonna stand here until you solve the problem. And here is the budget. This is the amount of money that the child needs. And you have to find this money in the budget, because we know you have it when you need it. And well, in the beginning, nobody took it seriously, but as the process continued, and I'm speaking basically in 1 or 2 days period, and the media started to pick this story, well, the government understood that they had to react, because, well, believe me, it's not only in Georgia, but it's everywhere in the world. People hate when children are in bad conditions, and when you know, when government has to do something and they're not doing something. So here is the basic thing. You expose this dysfunctioning when you react, when you indicate that here is the responsibility, here is the law which speaks about this responsibility, and it's not done. Somebody is trying to avoid. And so we basically gave this story coverage, and well, government had to react, and they reacted. It was not about much money, and so they could do it. But when they did it, it was plenty of things that started to work together. First, people started to see this movement as a group of people that can do the job. So if you have a problem, you can go to these people and they will help you. That's important, because it builds your credibility. People start believing that you have a power. And again, I believe you went through this topic of political power, and the power is a big part is about trusting and believing in it, right? So when we speak about obeying and disobeying, that's where we refer to this trust. And here people started to trust us. So we started to gain political power. Well, our members were happy to be part of such a nice thing, that some child that they did not even know could get whatever he needed at that moment. And we got very positive coverage also. So I think what this story is telling me is that you need to pick right battles and try to somehow try to be very realistic when you assess your own powers, when you assess your capabilities. Then when you have it, and when you have the story, and when you know that you want to do it, and when it's result oriented, you just have to do it, whatever it takes. You have big support in the beginning or a small support, it doesn't matter. If you believe it's just, if you believe it's your battle, if you believe you have resources to do it, you have to start doing it. And gradually, eventually, you make your story heard. So I was told to be very brief, and I believe I was brief. We'll be happy to answer your questions later. Now, I think I will stop sharing my file, Srdja.
Thank you, Georgi, for the great insights and for explaining a successful action. It's always encouraging to hear about a positive example. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sophia McLennan, Director of the Center for Global Studies at Penn State University. As Srdja mentioned at the beginning, two of them are currently working on this big research about dilemma actions. And I'm excited to hear more about their findings. So Sophia, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so I'm excited to be part of this. I guess I'm the geek in the room with the research, except that my research is on these kinds of fun things. This is an image of a mock New York Post that was created by the Yes Men, who are one of the most well-known Laughtivist groups. They tend to go after mostly like corporate and political structures with these sorts of Laughtivist tactics. So I'm going to talk about them a little more. Srdja and I have been teaming up with the idea that we want to go past our anecdotal experience, past the multiple examples that we've been hearing from Srdja and Georgie, and find out what we could learn from data. So we know, for example, other scientific studies have shown that nonviolent activism is twice as effective as violent in achieving goals. So Srdja and I wanted to find out if dilemma actions themselves offered an additional boost to a movement, and within that, if Laughtivism played a particular kind of role. So I'm going to share the research results with you. Just some background on me. I've been doing research on satire and democracy for a long time. I have a book on Stephen Colbert, who had a really influential show in the United States. This is a book cover of another project I did. And some of you have been asking about the role that satire plays. I have a lot of research on the efficacy of satire itself. And Laughtivism is sort of a different, as Srdja pointed out, it's a different component. It's the use of satire as a political tactic, particularly for nonviolent resistance movements. So there are sort of overlaps and distinctions and ways in which one can blend into the other, but it's useful to think of those things differently. I've given you a lot of different ways to contact me, and I hope you will, because we have to stay kind of short today. So I'm going to just present a few things and see where we go with it. So Laughtivism itself is on the rise globally. Part of what Srdja and I have been trying to do is see if we can go back and identify earlier examples, identify as many as we can. But one thing is clear, it's increasing in a substantial way. And it is particularly appealing to young activists. I like to say that satire is the political idiom of young people in general. That there's studies, for example, that show in any given protest, just a generic protest, if you just look at the signs that people are holding up, we see irony and satirical engagement at a level we've never, ever seen before. You could compare them to 60s photographs of folks protesting in the 60s, and the difference is amazing. So in my research, I can show, prove how satire itself as a mode of political engagement increases creativity, increases resilience, adds problem solving, increases your memory and sort of recall for political facts, which these days matters more than ever. And one of the things that makes using satire in politics particularly valuable is the pleasure component. Srdja talks about it being cool. But really what we know is that, so the brain has, as he points out, the fear factor. But when you're engaging with satire, you get pleasure, but you also get the pleasure of being clever. So one of the things about satire that makes it very valuable as a political tool is that you're teaching your movement to be sort of proud and pleasured by the fact that they're smart and sassy, and they use puns and they twist words and put them back at power. And that cleverness, that pleasure in that becomes sort of a really valuable resistance tool against not just fear, but basic political stupidity. Now, you want to think about the difference between satire and mockery, because mockery is mean. That's really the simplest way of thinking about it. It can look very similar, and I put in the chat, we're seeing a lot of it on the alt-right, a lot of mocking memes, nasty, but they still use some of the same tools. It's very, very close. In fact, you can show a meme to someone and they can't always tell whether it's just an alt-right group being mean or a group laughing and making fun of the way that alt-right groups are mean. So the reality is that this is very blurry. But there's simple tools. I did a piece for Salon that was basically how to tell the difference between a satirist and a jerk. So if you want, I can share you, it's literally a list. Like, you know, are you making fun of a group that is, you know, vulnerable, blah, blah. So if you want to see that, send me a message and I'll share it. Pranks are also super valuable. And again, pranks can happen, as Srdja and I have studied, accidentally, right? Laughtivist pranks can be an accident. But what we're really interested in is when they're motivated by a deliberate, larger political goal. So I'm showing this image here from another Yes Men Laughtivist thing where they helped a group of people decide, they like to do what they call identity correction. So they decided Volkswagen wasn't apologetic enough. So they just showed up at a car show with a Volkswagen that said, I'm sorry. And they embody it and it becomes really funny. And as Srdja just pointed out, it's very hard to shut it down. So there's many, many examples of how you can do this if you want to target, for example, a corporation that's being abusive. The Yes Men are really very skilled at that. So as Srdja points out, you replace apathy with engagement when you put Laughtivism in your movement. You erode the pillars of support because you show the pillars of support that are behind the repressive power are absurd, right? If you can show that, for example, it's ridiculous for riot police to be showing up when you're dressed as a clown, right? It becomes, if you show up and you're holding a flower and they have all this riot gear, they look silly. So that helps a lot. It also disrupts the narratives. I mean, at the end of the day, power works because of the stories it embeds in people's minds. And it says, look, we have to be repressive. Or we have to close our borders to immigrants, or whatever the ridiculous thing is that the power structure is telling the public. They tell it with such conviction and such confidence that your Laughtivist tactic can literally just identify what are those stories that power is telling and how can we unravel them? How can we show that they're silly, right? You're supposed to be taking care of us and yet you're hurting us. Simple things. And that's part of, for example, what we saw with Black Lives Matter that's been very powerful. Other things, you know, again, the Laughtivists attract media and allies and participants because, again, they show this ability to expose the flaws in power in a way that's fun and energizing and easy to join into. And again, as Srdja's pointed out, you look really bad when you try to repress it. If I'm angry, as I have a right to be, for example, and I'm part of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm yelling and I get arrested, that's one photo op. But if I'm happy and joyful and maybe, you know, dressed with a tutu and they arrest me when I'm doing that, that's much harder. And it makes the cops or whatever source of repression you're dealing with look so much worse. The secret weapon behind Laughtivism is this use of irony. And so again, I won't geek out too much, But the point is that all repressive power is ironic. It tells you that what it's doing is benevolent and in your best interest, but it isn't. So when you use irony back to expose it, it's exceptionally strong, right? So what we decided to do was take a broad set of cases beginning in 1930, ending in 2019. We got data on 44 examples, and Srdja and I are in fact expanding this to 100. But for the book that we've got coming out this fall called Pranksters versus Autocrats, this is the data we got. It's really exciting, right? So we looked through core questions. Did the dilemma action attract media attention? In 98% of all the cases it did. In Laughtivism, it was every single one. So there's a weird skew there because, of course, if we knew about it, it probably had media attention. So there'd be examples we didn't know. But you'll see this data is really exciting. Reducing fear and apathy, both 80%. Reducing risk of severe punishment to activists, very effective. Did it attract more supporters? Did it flip the script, right, and change the narrative? Was it replicated? Was it so successful that other people wanted to do the same kind of tactic? Was there international reaction? Did it lead to excuses, apologies, change in leadership? Did it have measurable effects? And then did it involve elements of Laughtivism? And so you can see that half of our studies, more or less, in the overall project were examples of Laughtivism. And again, you're going to see this. I'm happy to share this table with you separately. So what our research showed us was that there's a really exciting alignment between the experience that Srdja's had training activists and seeing how it works himself, and what we could offer in terms of scientific proof. And so what we're excited by is, what if we can prove that this tactic is effective? Could we change how people think about political actions going forward? So overall, the success across all the metrics is really high. Even on metrics with lower scores, for example, like for did it achieve concessions, right? So we had 43% achieve concessions. What we find, though, is that we still are getting data that proves that dilemma actions and Laughtivism as a subset of those are more successful than generic nonviolent movements that don't use these tactics. This is a huge deal. We do a better job at attracting international attention, a better job at achieving concessions, a better job at raising members and building sympathy, etc. And one of the things that we found that's interesting about the relationship, and we're digging into this better, is what about the Laughtivist dilemma actions separates it. So we have similar results in terms of media attention, reduction of fear, reduction of risk of punishment to the activists. Where we see some interesting, massive differences, and again, we want to see what happens when we expand this, is, for example, Laughtivism is much better at reframing the narrative than a dilemma action without Laughtivism. And it makes sense that that would be true, like I said, because the Laughtivist is using the embedded irony of power against itself. It's doing it in a very particular way that's extremely effective. The other thing, though, is that we found that Laughtivism is overall less successful at increasing the numbers in your group. And that could be for a few critical reasons. Think about how Srdja was talking about the clowns. I might think the clowns are really effective. I might be watching as a participant. I might be very sympathetic, but I might feel like I don't want to dress up like a clown, like I'm an old fart, like Srdja said. So it may be the case that the type of action that the Laughtivist uses feels like it requires a sort of performativity that I might not be comfortable with. So that's something we're looking at, but you may want to do it because of the outcomes may be better. Right? But again, you have to think within your list of goals, If, for example, one of them is that you really want to increase members, then your Laughtivist tactic should be easy for people to get involved with. And we saw this, for example, with the group Indivisible in the United States that was doing really easy Laughtivist actions to get people to join them. For example, like saying we're going to host a town hall, we want our local representative to show up. They, of course, weren't showing up, so they would like put an empty suit in a chair or put a cardboard cutout. That's an easy thing. People can do that. It doesn't make them feel like awkward or like they don't have the skills. They're not funny enough. So what are we doing next? We're expanding our study to 100 cases. We're fine-tuning the lessons that we're learning here, specifically types of Laughtivism. And then maybe what we're learning is that Laughtivism is an important early tactic, because if you can begin by reframing the narrative, then you can start expanding out and focusing on building your numbers. But again, these are things that will happen as Srdja and I drill into the details of the flow of this better. And then again, we want to start to identify distinctions across Laughtivist tactics, because they're clearly not all the same. Some require more investment, more training, a higher skill set, and some, again, are easier for people to just buy into. We could all make an ironic protest sign. That's easy. But dressing as a clown, as I've said, maybe not so easy. So those are things to think about in terms of the outcomes that we get. And so that's my part that I get to share. It's been really exciting getting a chance to do this, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and let you guys jump in with questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. There are plenty of questions. The chat is very live. Actually, I have difficulties following it. First of all, thank you both for this amazing contribution. And I think that we opened, we kind of answered some of the questions, but also opened a bunch of them. And I'll start by addressing two of you with the several questions that came on, and maybe leaving several more minutes at the end to answer to those that I kind of feel I may be jumping in. So I'll start with Georgi, whose presentation sparked many questions. So Georgi, one thing, because you know it, you've started as a small group, very similar to us. Actually, most of the movements start as a small group. So if you want to create a movement from level 0, how to gain the first few friends and supporters to getting going? Can a funny, catchy poster or thing like that be enough for a start? That's also related to a very hot topic that Sophia and me are looking at. And this is the topic, is this a very good startup tactic? So how do you feel about, your success, your experience with creating a dilemma action? And was it a real booster for creating Khmara and giving it a big name or a good name? And then about the topic, how do you select this topic? What brought you to the idea to connect something very broad as a failed state and a corruption to something very narrow, to the kids who can get treatment?
Well, thank you for an interesting question. I think first question, my answer would be just make friends. If you want to start a campaign is about unpredictable developments. You never know what's going to happen. You can't just plan like I'm going to do this tomorrow, day after tomorrow. When I'm speaking about 2003, I'm not speaking about 99 when I started joining group of friends. And since then, it all grew up into something that we can call a campaign. So it takes time. So first, make friends. If there is something to do in a short period of time, if the ambition is not about starting a movement, a big changer, but just a small impact thing, anything can work, smart message, smart photo, smart painting, anything that can attract attention. Because I'm observing that people love to find nice content, creative content, and Facebook, Twitter, or maybe other social networks are full of that sort of small campaigns when somebody is coming up with a creative solution sometimes with a catchy phrase, and it unites people around it. But you know, I don't believe you can expect a lot in a short period of time from that kind of beginning. So depends what you want to do. If you want to go serious, make good friends, because it will last. It will go in time, and it takes time. And unless you're a good team, people will not stick together, and this will never go into the mode when you are able to plan and execute like the movements do. So growing from big into, from small into big, that's usually what happens. It's never a big campaign in the beginning right away. Well, there can be some big firework style meetings and gatherings, and we have seen it in many places, but it doesn't last. It reaches certain point, and then it somehow vanishes, you know, because people lose interest. Sustaining, maintaining campaign needs dedicated people, and it takes time. This is for first. Second question, why we picked the topic? Because anything you do in the campaigns, to me, I mean, that's my personal view. You might have a different opinion. It has to be emotional. It has to touch the very emotions of the just an average people with the average mindsets. So we are not talking about these radicals there and there, right, on the different sides, but just people who live normal lives. It has to touch them. And when I'm speaking about the health sector, it does touch lots of people, because, health is important. You know, I don't need to speak about it a lot, but especially it is important when we speak about health of children. So it's not speculating with something, it's just trying to find the problems that will attract more attention, because there are many problems, there are thousands of problems, but you have to pick the ones that have potential to unite different people. And so that's why I believe that that specific action, which is just one of many other set of actions that we had, was kind of successful in its own way. So I hope I answered your question.
That's a great answer, especially first looking at the number two. I think you stated clearly. When you are picking the topic, one of the keys of picking the topic is something that people can relate to. So it shouldn't be something really vague like human rights. You want to take the concrete example where the human rights are violated. It's like you can say the oppression against the black people, and then you have the video of a black man dying under the white policeman knee. So these are the very different things. And as Gandhi's salt or the Georgi's sick kids who cannot be treated, this is something that personally affiliates people. And people are more likely to get engaged if they feel that the topic is personal, or it can relate to them and their own lives and their own families. Similarly, for the first question, just to clarify why I'm standing up with Georg on this, it may be the very good startup tactic. It needs to raise the attention. But this is completely another phenomenon. So distinguishing between the attention and mobilization is one thing. So you do something cool, you do something pranky. But in order to build a movement, you need to do something else. You need to focus on organization. So yes, the mobilizations are important, but even the mobilizations in millions, like the Women's March on the day of President Trump's inauguration, are not enough if they're not followed with organization. I guess Georgi was thinking about that when you say that you start by recruiting your friends and supporters, and that the movement startup is actually very similar to the business startup. And in the business startup, your first early investors are 3 Fs: friends, family, fools. Very similarly, in the movement startup, your first members, your first circle of trust are the people that you know personally and are dropping into this category. And then you have the core group. And then once you have a core group, then the dilemma action and the Laughtivism is a great key. But once you make the dilemma action or the Laughtivism and get 1,000 shares, you're not sitting on your back. You're looking at these shares and you're trying to recruit these people. So you're now expanding from friends, family, and fools into the people who are really interested in the topic, which, as Georgi stated great, should be something that relates to all of us. Now let's migrate to the many questions that Sophia got, and I tried to filter it to the several. I will start with the last first. It's like you mentioned that situation in which yelling and screaming and being angry, as opposed to a situation in which you're dressed like broccoli and get arrested, and that sounds great and makes a lot of the sense. But how do you make people that are frustrated and angry thinking about how effective this is and kind of contain this anger and turn this anger into the strategic thinking of how should I do stuff instead of just yelling? So I assume it's like, is the prerequisite for the Laughtivism to have a cool and strategically thinking group of people within your organization? And how do you make angry people do funky stuff?
I mean, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that a lot of people have a lot of good reasons to be angry. And it's really important in the structure of your movement not to shame people. We'll hear that a lot, right? If you weren't so angry, then this would go better. And that came out a lot after Black Lives Matter, for example. So the first thing I would say is to validate and legitimize that anger and not try to repress it, and definitely not try to shame the activists for feeling it, because frankly, anger is usually that spark that starts some of this. Then the next thing is, and this you know perfectly well, is that in the development of a true political movement, you then start to say, okay, we are angry, but we want results. And that means people have to be deliberate, and they have to be thoughtful, and they have to actually put their own sort of personal ego and what they need as an individual aside for the greater movement. And that's when you say, okay, we're going to be angry when we get back to our, where we hang out and chat, or we're going to share these things. But we're also going to start recognizing that if we want to bring more members in, if we want to get sympathy for our movement, we want to kind of think in a very strategic way about the messaging that we want to use. I mean, it's really difficult for me at any level to criticize a group that comes out and is just pissed. I think about, for example, the protests in Ferguson. This is a real thing. It makes sense to be angry. It's just that it turns out we have tons of proof that won't help your movement get what it wants. So the question becomes, do you want to be angry, which you have an absolute right to be, or do you want results? And that means that we have to actually sometimes do stuff that isn't, that doesn't allow us to just express our feelings. So that's fine.
So it's a really cool answer, and I think it's also very, very, very often question when you work with the different groups, and you try to pull them back and try to make them think strategically. One of the tricks is designing the time for planning. So if you are busy protesting, and then of course when you're in the protest, you're angry and you are swollen by this angry energy, then it's less likely that you will come with something witty or even something strategic. Where breaking down your day or your operations into the time when you plan and time when you execute sometimes help people distance from this predominant angry energy. So yes, I would agree with you. Very interesting question that comes from the chat. I would imagine Laughtivism requires that you have leaders with a good sense of humor that relates to the movements. And I wonder if some attempted Laughtivist actions aren't funny or too crude, while others are brilliant. How do we manage this? There's also another question on this. Where is this balance between being witty and cool and being offensive? And of course, how do we balance this? This is my personal question in a very different world where sometimes you get these blocks of thinking within the political correctness or social correctness. So where is the line? What is the line where this becomes effective? How do you see this line? Is this something designed to the like this something very specific to the societies or cultures, or we can draw some universal guidance?
Well, the first thing that you mentioned, the question of the sense of humor among those in power, right? That's one part of the question. If Srdja and I were going to be consultants to dictators, we'd tell them to get a sense of humor, because then they would keep their power longer, right? So turns out we could, if we went to the dark side, we could teach them how, in fact, to diffuse this stuff, how to make dilemma actions and Laughtivism go nowhere, right? Because they would be like, oh, that's kind of funny. And then they wouldn't be threatened. So the reason why these work is because, as Srdja and I know, and the research shows, people who are abusing power, they have no sense of humor because they know what they're doing is terrible. I mean, these are not, unless, I mean, you have the rare example of the true sociopath who actually doesn't, you know, feel anything. But generally speaking, you take someone like Trump, he has no sense of humor, none, zero. In fact, there's interesting previous examples from when before he was president, where he was like used in Saturday Night Live sketches, and they gave him the scripts ahead of time. And it's like, he couldn't even understand the jokes. Like, he doesn't get it. He's just a thin-skinned bully. So it turns out most bullies are thin-skinned, and that's effective then for your tactics. The second question is, well, does Laughtivism work in every case? How do you make sure that it doesn't have blowback? I've done research exactly on examples of when satire has led to people being murdered. If folks, I've shared my email. If people want to read that article, it's important to see, because whenever you make a joke, you are creating divisive boundaries. It's what we call boundary heightening humor. It doesn't work unless we're making jokes about farts, then, which everybody thinks is funny, usually, we will create, I'm on one side of the joke, you're on the other. So the boundaries will increase, and you have to understand how that works. So who's going to be in on the joke? Who's the target of the joke? The target has allies. So if I make fun of Trump, I'm insulting a Trump supporter. The Trump supporter will feel more animosity towards me. That is inevitable. There isn't any way to fix that. So being very clear about those boundary lines and the impact of the joke and who you're bringing into it is super important. And you will occasionally make a mistake, right? We use the example from Pussy Riot, where, you know, Pussy Riot's a generally sympathetic group. They're going after abusive power in Russia, but they make the mistake of putting a church in the middle of it. Now you're getting at people's beliefs and you're insulting them in a way that maybe they didn't intend to do. So what I would say again is, Srdja and I are your best allies in this. You want to, if you have something you think that's a Laughtivist tactic, you ask us, because we will tell you that's a good one. Oh, well, this might not work out the way you're planning, right? So it depends. You have to think through how the joke will target a group and how it will create the lines between those who are in on it and those who are feeling targeted by it.
This is amazing answer, and also it's related to the few more questions that I designed to answer myself. And it's like, please take a look at where this drops. So there is always this question: can this make your movement look ridiculous? When is it too much? And do you know of any examples where a dilemma action ended up in, you know, falling of the dictator or something like that? Please distinguish. Dilemma actions and Laughtivism are the tactics. Strategy is something different. Strategy is serious focus on shortest causal chain on which you're influencing certain pillars or institutions in order to create change. So you need a serious vision, you need a serious strategy, and then of course, within this strategy, you can have as many unserious actions and dilemma actions and Laughtivism actions as you can, but only while it serves the larger strategy. So take a look at the Georgi's example. You are looking at the fallen state, you're looking at the incapability of state to answer demands of the citizens. You're looking at the zillions of money being siphoned out to the tycoons or the private account. You're looking at the police that is driving their own car because the state couldn't provide them with a police car. So your strategy is raising awareness about the corruption, capitalizing on the corruption, and winning elections on the basis of corruption. These are serious things. And then you have strategic goals, exposed corruption here. Look at the transparency or how it can be changed here. So we are now in a strategic thinking room. And then we go to the tactical thinking room and say which thing we can do to expose this corruption. And where there's a dilemma action focusing on Ministry of Health, selectively picking a cool issue, a sick kid that can't go for a treatment, mobilizing people around something like that, making government make a concession, and then overrunning them with similar demands and showing the inefficacy of it. Or this is something else. This is like in Montenegro. You know, somebody have called the prime minister who lost his luggage on a trip to Italy, using his government card to go and buy himself an underwear. So now immediately you have a stray of the people coming in front of the government building, bringing their own underwear because they want to donate it to the prime minister. Because if they donate it to the prime minister, maybe he's not going to buy his own panties out of the government money. That means exposing corruption. That means exposing the serious issue. That went very well. The guy went out, he excused that kind of concession kind of stuff, but that's because I know this guy. This guy has a sense of humor, as Sophie said. And he went out, he walked through the line of the panties named to him. He strayed into the line of the activists. He hugged the leading activist and said, "You caught me here. You made me look ridiculous. Oh, your beer." And he got away with it because he did it that way. If instead he said the police to arrest this activist, that would be a completely different story. So now take a look at this. And once again, as Sophie said, it's one thing. It's like one thing is when you're designing it, how you're getting it there. And secondly, how to look at the Laughtivism and the dilemma action in the wider scope of the movement. Because the movements are very different animals. They need vision. They need unity. They need planning. They need large membership. And then you can drop in, or you can decide to live in your own small niche, like the Yes Men, being a small prankster groups, exposing corruption and, you know, it's like injustice and stuff like that, and going around and rolling around circles. But that's their strategic decision. They decided to be what they want to be. And when you are applying your Laughtivism into your tactics, it's same as with any other tactic. And it should be related to your strategic goal. And tactics exercised without a strategic goal are actually very much like to backfire, whether they're funny or super serious. So Sophie, one last question. What about your opponent's media outlets? Can Laughtivism somehow be used against the Rupert Murdoch's news empire, Fox News, all of these media outlets, or this is not something you advise using when targeting media?
Because this is such a great question, because it's exactly what I wrote about in my book on Stephen Colbert, and then the book is Satire Saving Our Nation. And I have another book that is looking for its publisher, which is called The Comedians Aren't Kidding, that goes into this more. There's substantial evidence of how satire has worked to undermine conservative and alt-right news media. There's no question about that. I can share some really exciting studies that show that the sort of story of how news media has changed globally isn't also a story of how satire news has risen in power and efficacy We've got data that shows that people who watched Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert were more knowledgeable about political issues and current events than people who watch Fox News. So we saw a massive divergence in terms of news media consumption, how it interacted with the audience. And it's a really powerful story. And there's such good anti sort of alt-right satire news. You've got like Jonathan Pine in the UK. I love his stuff. Jonathan Pine, sorry. And there's sort of satire news shows in Mexico, in Nigeria, in Taiwan. I'm actually writing a whole separate book dealing with that. So anyone who wants to talk to me about this, they should message me. I'm happy to share the research I have on it.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. I would add that many of the cases we were looking at are actually reactions to media, or actually having a media as a target point. One of these examples coming from movement in Poland during the time of the Soviet occupation, where in the time of TV news, people were not only hitting pots and pans like we did here in Srdja, but they actually took the physical TV sets for a walk. Like they would put them in strollers and take the TV sets for a walk. And A, this is to prove that they don't want to stay TV. B, that was the perfect excuse to walk around and talk politics. And C, it's legal. So no, even in the very oppressive system, there is no regulation banning you from taking your TV for strolling, but sends a pretty strong message about what they think about what's coming from these TV sets. So yes, media can and have been a way of doing it. And also media has another effect, is that if you mock them effectively, they lose credibility. So it's not that, like, not only that you're targeting them, but you're targeting their credibility. And this is what media needs. It's not only about the reach, it's about the credibility.
Well,
and,
oh, can I add something? So here's one of the ways in which satire is an umbrella that can make your Laughtivism even more effective. If you think of it this way, the news media plays a major role in promoting the narratives that structures of power are using. Sometimes it's a little critical, sometimes it isn't, but usually it assumes, it allows those in power to set the premise and structure, and then the news media comes in and says, oh, we agree or we don't agree. Satire is highly effective at cutting through the BS of that and going, that is the dumbest way to frame this issue I've ever seen. And so when you've got someone like Trevor Noah or John Oliver or Hassan Minhaj saying, are you kidding me? That helps open people's minds. So then when your movement steps in, you've got fertile ground to develop your political tactics. So they're not at odds. It's the work that the satire news is doing is it's keeping people mentally nimble. It's diffusing the sort of structural binaries that we get. Like we get this red state, blue state stuff. The satirist is like, what is that? And that is very valuable in changing the political structures through which people think. And so then it makes your movement have much bigger potential. So you should see that as an ally, as sort of part of the, the caloric intake that helps your movement, have energy. So it's all good.
Perfect. Last, because we have only a few minutes. One of the things that people actually ask: so, what if your opponent uses it against you? And this is a kind of a thrilling thing. And like it. Once again, it depends. The question was there many examples where the oppressive government was using mocking of the activists? The answer is we couldn't find any effective examples because the oppressive governments are not funny per se, and they're already arresting activists and they're already threatening activists. So it's like when they are mocking it on the top of it, it's not like you can beat somebody and then make him look like a joke. So I think this is the one problem. But yes, your ideological opponents can do this, and they can try to mock you. And once again, the thing is like, it's a very big difference in how the third parties see this. Whether you are attacking the person or a character, or you're attacking the policy or activity. Because if you're using humor to expose corruption, for example, or to expose bulliness, or to expose incompetence, or to expose the way how your government is dealing with the coronavirus, then whatever your government does to you, whether they arrest you or they mock you, is actually adding to the topic, because it creates more attention about incapability of the government to deal with the coronavirus or the specific corruption case. So it can work for you as well. Whether if you are trying to mock your opponent from the point of insult or the way he or she looks, or this is where the things get tricky, because then people sympathize with your opponent. The same way if the government tries to mock you or to discredit you on the things you are doing, that's something which can be successful if they only have the sense of humor. But if they are trying to mock the way you talk, mock you the way, it's like that. This is where it becomes personal, when it's perceived as a personal attack. Even if it looks funny, it can gain you more supporters. So with this notion, I will try to conclude this 2 weeks. First of all, I would like to say thank you to Georgi and Sophia for participating in this one. You really contributed a lot, and it was a really thrilling and enlightening session. Second, for all of you who asked numerous questions, thank you for being active. We are living in the COVID era. What COVID era taught us that these online occasions are useful and cool, only if people are engaged. Otherwise, they look like a boring movies you watch on a screen. Thank you for helping us not turning it into the boring movie. For all of you who were through the 4 sessions, hope you had fun. As Anna promised, please go fill the questionnaire. We can send you videos of the sessions you missed. We can send you PowerPoints. You can also write us at office@canvasopedia.org. We are working on a new app, which will hopefully help us connect more effectively and consult with concrete groups on concrete topics on a relatively secure basis. And I encourage you all to stay in touch and stay tuned and continue changing the world. And last but not least important, thanks Jelena 1, Jelena 2, Breza and Anna, and Slobo and Sinisha for making all of this happening. It was a big effort from a small team of people, but to my surprise, it worked exceptionally well. Have a great day, and million thanks for being a part of the Canvas Summer Academy. You'll get the link for evaluations and our further communication within your email. Stay great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.